Should we wait another minute or two? Okay. So Karen put something, so I'll be informal before we start. Karen put something in the chat about the conference next week, the NCHEP, the National Conference for Higher Ed in Prison. Glad you're going, Karen. So I was going to email anyone going from Maryland and organize a happy hour. Well, I'm not going to do it. I was going to say my graduate student, but she's not a graduate student anymore. We hired her and she's graduated, so I can't call her that. Anyway, I was going to have my colleague organize something for folks in Maryland. So I know Emily's going, Karen's going, I think Alicia's going, whoever else is going, Ainsley is going. I'll just make sure you're all on the email. If anyone else is going, let me know.
Awesome, thank you.
I don't know if I have your email, Karen. You just put it in the, oh, actually, yeah, I do, because you're on these meetings. Never mind.
Just from that, sounds like something that I should be at.
Is Danielle going?
I'm not going. I assume Danielle is.
She probably is. I can't imagine her. Yeah, she
is. Vermika's
I'm sorry,
going.
tuned in a little late. What meeting are you talking about?
This is the NCHEP conference, the National Conference for Higher Ed in Prison that the Alliance of Higher Ed runs. This is next week in New Orleans.
Oh, in New Orleans. I think I'm not going.
Yeah, it's sold out in like a week.
Wow,
So
because of New Orleans.
Sign up in the beginning. Vermika's going, yes, and Anne is going from Goucher. All right, Steve, should we get started?
Yeah, I go ahead, Andrea, please.
Okay. All right, I guess I run the show, so we will start. Okay, so everyone should have the agenda and the minutes from last time. This is not like a formal thing where I have to say approve the minutes, or is it?
You can.
Does anyone have any issues with the meetings from the minutes from last meeting?
No.
No.
All right, so those are approved. And then our agenda for today covers funding, space, and technology. But before we jump into all of that, some of us had conversations about incentives. That was one of our priority areas. And some of us have been talking about removing that from our priorities right now, just so we could shift focus to the three more pressing things. And I feel like we can kind of make the argument that incentives are important, but not the top priority. And my main reason is because we all have wait lists for our programs, actually. So I'm assuming that's true for Goucher and Georgetown. I know Bowie has one. So, and I think we're going to include data in the final report or the June report about some of these data points, like how many people we have in our programs, what are our wait list numbers. So I think we should maybe table incentives for now. Georgetown does not have a wait list. Oh, you don't keep a wait list, but you probably have one. Or you probably have a lot of applications. All right, well, we'll figure it out how to talk about that.
Oh, I think, Andrea, I think that the incentives thing is something for all programs, getting people to stay in school or enroll those who don't, so I will keep that in mind for our recommendations overall,
Overall.
Yeah, and if you want to bring it back to higher ed as well later, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know, but what does the group feel? Because a few of us had these conversations. I'm indifferent. Unfortunately, so many of our students aren't eligible for credits once they complete the program based on their offense, which is something that I've been interested in having changed. But again, we can save that for another day. So there's all different types of incentives that we've been talking about. Gordon has his hand raised. But yeah, what does the group feel about dropping incentives specific to this higher ed group?
I think that right now that shouldn't be the priority. I remember John talking about this the last time we met. I think it's significant. I think it's important, but I don't think that's the big dog right now. We need to focus on the other things, and then we can come back to it. And some things I think we're going to have to accept that we can't change. We can look at and make maybe comments or recommendations regarding legislation that excludes certain things. But some of the stuff I don't think we'll be able to change anytime soon with the climate.
Okay, thank you. Meredith, you had a hand up.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is because we're in the process of going from volunteer to full time, figuring out how much students will be paid and how many credits they're going to be earning is like a big factor for our students and whether they choose to continue their enrollment with us. So it's like, it does have significance to me right now, and it might, if we get to the point where every college program is going full time, but I'm okay with putting it to the side. I just wanted to voice that it will impact. Like, we do have wait lists. We have double the number of students applying than we have spaces for currently. But they're also have said essentially, like, if the student wages and the diminution credits don't work out the way they want to, they aren't necessarily going to go through with the enrollment. So if that makes sense, I just wanted to voice that.
Yeah, so Meredith, are you able to work that out, like, kind of with Danielle and
I mean, we're trying to work it out with case management right now, and I know Tanya is on the call and working on it, but it's sort of like significant to me because I'm personally working on it, but I understand it might not be important to the whole group. Yes.
Right. Yes, we are in the process of working with the case management supervisor or director on that, because they're looking at it being across the board, not just at one or two facilities, and they have to straighten it out. It could be a local decision. That's where they're trying to hash out whether it's going to be a local decision or not, and where the funds are coming from. So still working on that, Meredith. You know, the tables turn a little slowly here.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts or about incentives before we drop it? Karen?
Well, just to be aware that there is a law that was passed a few years ago to diminution of sentence, and there's a group that determines what people get when they complete various programs, including college. And I'm very interested in how that thing's been implemented and the history of it. And because when we were putting that together, we envisioned some bigger incentives than they've developed. So I for one will personally want to look into that, and we'll continue to do so, and may bring back information to the group. But you know, we don't need to talk about incentives right now.
So it's
Yeah.
being discussed elsewhere.
Well, I mean, I want to find out what's happening with this, awarding people time off of sentence, and what that history has been for the last few years, and then maybe bring it back to the group as part of the incentive issue, because I think it should be stronger than it is, to encourage people to go to school. But because a lot of states have done it and have much more generous incentives, time off of sentences. So I want to look at that personally, bring it back to everybody.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I shared some of our students who completed their degree, took them 6 years, don't get anything off because of the type of sentence they have, which I think is problematic. But I also think, it takes 6 years for a student to finish a bachelor's degree program. And that's very different from somebody finishing a certificate program. And I feel like it should be the amount of time you spend in a program. Like, so maybe a full year of higher ed, you get some time off. Year 2, year 3, and so on, just because it takes a very long time. And sometimes students might be transferred elsewhere and they have nothing to kind of show that they've been part of a program.
Right.
I just wanted to clarify, like when I'm thinking of incentives, and I agree, right? If we don't have space, if we don't have technology, like incentives kind of moves to the bottom of the totem pole. But kind of what Meredith was saying, I just wanted to sort of maybe table that when we're talking about incentives, it's not necessarily like what can you get for it. There's really no bigger incentive than time off your sentence. There's nothing that matters more, including higher ed, right, than coming home. And so getting I don't know if it's the law that needs to change, I think it is, but getting it so that people can be assigned to, and what I mean by assigned to is how you earn your diminution credits, getting folks assigned to higher ed specifically, not just education, at what at least at MCIW was 10 days off a month, as opposed to other jobs, which is 5 days off a month. You want the bigger number, the 10 days off, and anything else that we can get as well. But the 10 days off is a bare minimum. And then that way people don't have to go to other jobs like the shops where they have to work from 6 a.m. to 2:30, quick turnaround, change your clothes, cup of coffee, go to school at 3 o'clock and then school until 7. That's exhausting. But right now, because it's voluntary, that's what folks are having to do. And then in addition to that, at the shops, you make money. And we would love to say that like, oh, the biggest thing is education, but like also money, right? Like also not being a burden on your family, also being able to be self-sustaining in prison is very, very important. And it really gives people agency over their own lives. So it's just something that like when we're talking about incentives, it's not necessarily like, here's a fellowship program, here's a stipend that we can do, all super important, but time off your sentence, self-sustaining, and education, those are like unfortunately considered incentives. So I think that sometimes like if you don't know the system, like from having been in the system, you might not understand that. I just want to make that clear that when we're talking about incentives, for me at least when I'm thinking about it, it is being assigned to higher ed, which right now at least I think anybody but Georgetown can't be. That's step one, so that you can get days off your sentence and then be able to earn some kind of a more living wage, which you can do in the shops. Folks in the shops make $5-6 a day. So compared to $1.25 a day that you might make working or in education, like in a GED program, you make $23 at the end of the month if you are assigned to GED. That you can't live off that because the food sucks and everything else sucks and you have to buy everything for yourself. So I just kind of want to put that out there as a baseline.
Maybe it'd be good to one day to just have a little 10 minutes, putting all the incentives together, because it's not just time off a sentence, it's good time, awards, it's money out per hour. Danielle had started talking one day about how they try to encourage education more than other programs in various ways. So I think before we add or subtract it, maybe just some homework needs to be done. I'll take charge of trying to do that and putting this together so that we know what there's a lot of incentives, different kind of incentives, and put them together. It includes incentives like Gordon talked about in the past of peer help, to get people, to think about their own lives and joining in with certain, other people who are incarcerated, and who you hang with and who encourages you. So anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, Steve. I think there needs to be a lot more like kind of homework and done around incentives. And since this commission is going to continue on, I think we just move it to maybe next year so we could do some of that research, because I do think it's still important. And what I'm hearing is it is. So since we have a report due in June 1, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we table it just for that report, but keep it on the table for.
It could be part of the report saying things to be visited,
Yeah.
A list of things, various things I want to put in that report.
I think that's a good idea. And we can include it later. Yeah. Okay. So let's shift, if everyone's okay with shifting, to talking about these three things that will go into the report, starting with funding. Last time we talked, we talked about the importance of incarcerated students being able to access state funds in general. We think that's a good idea, especially during this climate where we don't know the future of Pell, and that shouldn't go into the report, but that's kind of the feeling. around the country. And there are states that allow incarcerated students to access state funds, and Maryland really doesn't do anything in this area. So Ainsley, I don't know if you have it available. I do, if you want me to share, or if you could share. But Ainsley, great, has been creating this document of a few state examples of states that have passed certain bills or allow for incarcerated students to access state funding. Oh wow, it's growing. I didn't even look at page 2. This is awesome. So I think some of this is going to go into the report to show examples of other states that allow incarcerated students to access state scholarships and funds and all of this. So there's tons of examples here. And what we talked about last time was, and it's still not entirely clear, when Danielle was here last month, she talked about how she's been having meetings with MHEC, the Maryland Higher Ed Commission, about whether or not incarcerated students can use the existing scholarships and grants through that office. And their response, based on what Danielle talked about, was that, you know, there's no language in those scholarships that say incarcerated students can access them. And I don't really know who she talked to, but they had a little bit of an issue of adding language in about incarcerated students using those funds because it takes away funds from other non-incarcerated people. So I don't know, it's a little bit unclear of whether or not incarcerated students can access those funds, or if it has to be written in where they're specifically saying they can. That was a little bit unclear from last time, but we also shifted and talked about creating a tuition waiver program specific for incarcerated students. The state has 2, one for foster care recipients and one for homeless populations. And MHEC seems to really want to focus more on that rather than allowing incarcerated students to access all of the other options. There's like 20 different scholarship programs throughout in the state that students can apply for. I think a tuition waiver program would be easier because it kind of is specific for that population. Anyway, that's what we talked about last time. I think the report should have those things as recommendations. Perhaps simply just recommending a tuition waiver program. How that's paid for is a whole nother story, because I don't think we can ask for anything. I don't think we could ask the state to pay for anything at this moment in time. I still think it should be a recommendation. And whether it happens this year or in 2 or 3 years, I still think it should be in there. I think the state should start thinking about it. Ainsley, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask real quick. I know with the tuition waiver that with Pell Grants, they have to be paying some sort of tuition. So how that would affect Pell Grants, or if you wouldn't need Pell Grants because the tuition would be waived.
So Pell Grants, so let's say Pell Grants we have them forever. Pell Grants don't cover the full cost of tuition. So the tuition waiver program, in my mind, would cover the difference, would cover books. So programs don't have to pick up those additional costs. You know, some of us who have existing programs have figured some of that out, but this is more for newer programs who realize that, oh, we have to buy all of the books and technology for our students. Pell doesn't cover it because Pell doesn't even cover full tuition. So it's just a way to cover the additional costs that Pell is not picking up.
Awesome, thank you.
God forbid Pell goes away, we have something in the state perhaps that would save us. Of course, that would be a higher cost, right?
Just if I could, a reminder that, you know, I don't know what weight whatever we recommend to the legislature has, but I think in the report that we should, and maybe we can start doing the interim report, is possible legislative recommendations and have a list of things, and that might be one. I mean, I think it's, in a way, this might be low-hanging fruit. There's going to be people who do not want to give any tuition to anybody incarcerated. That's always the case. And you can find them on both sides of the political spectrum, believe me. But I think it's one that we can have some convincing arguments for, and that it wouldn't necessarily take legislation. I don't know. I mean, maybe look into this and see how these, what the definitions are, and maybe it's just a matter of a more liberal interpretation by whoever administers this stuff. But maybe it might take legislative stuff, but we need to figure that out, put that into recommendation, and hopefully we'd have a delegate or a senator want to pick some of that stuff up in the judiciary committees and bring that forward if it requires legislation. So
Alicia has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about that, how we can address the logic of this kind of binary of like the regular student versus the incarcerated student, that I think even if it doesn't end up being, a specific recommendation, which I think it should, that those opportunities should be available to incarcerated students as well, that is built into maybe the kind of intro, the larger argument, because I think that logic, it could be the most destructive in the long term. If that is built into the recommendations, that logic is okay, that is the logic that would undo all of this work eventually, that there's somehow a justification for differentiating students. So I just want it to be strongly, like, in some shape or form, articulated that logic is not acceptable, and to be very deliberate about that.
could you clarify that a little bit, please? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, just the logic that somehow they aren't our students as a state, that incarcerated students aren't ours, that they're deserving of the, that we would have to even write legislation or policy that would specifically intentionally include them. They should be included if they meet the criteria of the scholarship, if it's a major requirement or whatever, if they meet the requirements otherwise, then there shouldn't be a differentiation between it. So the idea is that if we keep sanctioning this differentiation, then that would be the problem down the road, because it leaves the door open for excluding them, even from things that we might be able to kind of get them included in through this process, if that makes sense. It's the logic that's destructive, I think, the most destructive in the long term.
I think that should be recommendation 1, is incarcerated students should be able to access the same scholarships and grants that any student in the state who's eligible, right? If an incarcerated student is eligible because of all the other criteria, they should be able to access it, number 1. But when you look at them really closely, it just excludes our students because of their age, because of other factors. So there's exclusions in there. They're just not eligible for all of them. That's why we say recommendation 2 becomes a tuition waiver option, which would capture all of our students in terms of eligibility. But
Andrea,
I think
how does age enter in to exclude them?
Well, if you just look at some of the scholarships, some of them are for students right out of high school. Right? Or students who, oh gosh, I don't know.
A lot of them are for under 26.
Under 26?
Right, under 26, or every single scholarship on MHEC's website has criteria. And when I looked through them, I'm like, oh, that wouldn't work for our population because of age factors, and there's other things too. But I think Alicia's right. We just, that's number 1 in terms of if they are eligible because of the criteria drafted under each scholarship, they should be able to access it. And that is not asking for money from the state. It is just allowing opportunity. And I think that's pretty easy. And then we move into number 2 is a tuition waiver program for everybody else who doesn't fit the criteria of all the 20 scholarships. And we can talk about, the fact that these tuition waivers wouldn't be, $10,000 a year to go to college. It might just be maybe $2,000, right? Picking up the extra cost that Pell doesn't cover? I don't
Do
know.
the colleges have a figure that they use? I mean, each college is probably different, but like you're contributing something to make up the difference at your school, and Georgetown be doing the same, and the other. I mean, it might differ from school to school what that waiver would be, or is that easy to kind of set a general thing at $2,000 a semester? $1,000. I mean, is it?
I mean, if you want us to put like an actual number into this report, I mean, we could all get together, Goucher, Georgetown, and Bowie, and we can talk about what that might look like. Do you think that's necessary for this report for June to put a dollar amount?
It might be useful so people know what you're talking about. Instead of $20,000 a year for tuition, we're talking about a couple $1,000 tuition waiver. I mean, just for people who have to consider this, and liberalizing, their criteria. Because it might be different for people incarcerated than other people that are normally given these tuition scholarships or waivers, whatever, too. I don't know. So just a figure would always be useful, but also emphasizing that it's not in the state budget. It's, it's other sources. So people are clear that we're not proposing something that's going to cost the state more money. We're asking for opportunity. So anyway.
We have some hands up. Ainsley?
Yeah, I also want to say that this report that's due in June, if it ends up being due in June, doesn't have to be very expansive. Other interim reports are like pretty brief, and they're just like, here's what we're looking at, here's what we've done so far. So in terms of like having really specific arguments or really specific recommendations and data and all that sort of stuff that we obviously want to put as much as we can into this June report. But it doesn't have to be super, super in depth. So don't feel pressure about that. And in terms of, I think what Alicia was saying is, I think part of the research I'm doing on other states is, looking at their arguments. I think a lot of states have moved where they have previously excluded, removing that exclusionary language, and only a couple of states have added specifically that incarcerated students are eligible. But, looking through the bill passing process, what kind of hurdles that they went over, what kind of arguments that they used that seemed successful. So we can use those to build our final recommendation and our final report, but that's not going to be due until December. So I just kind of want to make sure that nobody's super worried about this June report. It doesn't have to be like really in depth.
I'm looking at a 5 to 10 page report for our interim report, which is much longer than any that are normally turned in. It's often a letter saying, well, we're in process, we're looking at this, and that. I want people to know what we're looking at least in topics and, issues that we are pursuing, and then possible, some there might be some draft basic recommendations. I don't know. We'll look at this and we'll decide ourselves. Ains and I will work together on this with you, and we'll propose it to the commission. The commission will say, yeah, this is the interim report. Okay. So it's not that we're
10
just
pages would be a lot, I would think.
Yeah, but if you look at all the questions and things we were asking and recommend and things we're coming up with, I mean, higher ed, you could have a page on what you're talking about in general, and the same thing for ABE, special ed, CT. I think it would be easy. We could cut it down if we want to, but I think also somebody ought to know at the beginning what's the commission supposed to do, what we've been doing briefly, what the process has been, and links to where people can go look at stuff we're doing, so people can take a report and go click on our resources and see what's going on. I want to be a very opaque kind of recommendation. Even if we don't come up with specific recommendations, these are the issues and things we're talking about and that we think are important. So I'm saying 5 or 10, knowing that, we'll adjust it according to how everybody feels, and talk to the delegate about it. What does he want? Delegate Ampry. And since the session's over, we'll be doing some more conversing with his office. Ainsley and I'll do the writing, but anybody else wants to help us with your sections, and then, we'll bring it back to you and get everybody's comments and argue about things if we have to a little bit, you know.
Should we move from funding and talk about space?
Sure.
Like Christian has his hand up.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
hi. I had a quick question regarding funding. So are we, based on the conversation, I'm assuming we're figuring out our interim recommendations now. So I heard 2. Are we settling, or are we good with 2 for the funding piece? I just want to be clear where we are in the process. So sorry.
I personally would like to ask for more. I just know it's not the right time. For new programs to start up, they need staff, and some universities and colleges don't have those kind of private external funds to support staff to run the programs. Like that's a problem, but that requires some state funds, which I thought a year or 2 ago we would be working on some legislation about supporting higher ed and prison in general, which would give programs funds for staff. But I don't know. It feels like anything attached to money is going to be hard to include in this report.
I guess I asked because there was something I don't think was quite discussed, but I'm curious about as far as tuition, and it was kind of discussed. But I want to be clear: is it like tuition? Are we recommending tuition waiver, right, or just like Pell Grants? So I was kind of unclear on that because I think the tuition waiver would be more expensive. So yeah, if anybody can speak on that, I was just curious. Again, apologies if I missed that conversation.
Anyone want to add or chime in or answer?
I think for the purpose of an interim report, you know, we could use, you say, well, we're looking at tuition waivers, we're looking at you know, supplements for Pell Grants, we're looking, you know, because we do have some of the colleges already doing some of these things, but we're looking at more sources to do this. I mean, Goucher has got private monies they're putting into this in Georgetown, and you know, so they're a little different than the other schools. So I don't see any problem at this point of including language. We're looking at tuition waivers, whatever terminology we use at this point, because we're not going to be real specific with recommendations. We're looking at topics in the report that we're going to tell people we're talking about. Does that help? I don't know.
Yeah. Like I said, I just wanted to make sure that I know you're going to distribute them, but just even before they're kind of put together, like I just want to be clear on the process of where we are. Like I said, it sounded like we were kind of doing the recommendations. That was definitely something I think we should, like you said, speak to, and maybe even get more specific, like put our thumb on a scale of, you know, tuition waiver or both, or what we think is, you know, the best path forward. So, but okay, well, thank you. I just wanted to. I'm assuming we'll return to this, but I was just curious. But thank you.
It's important because we're losing Warwick Tech, for example, because they don't have any money to make the difference up between Pell and what the real cost is. So Warwick Tech is not going to be providing classes anymore to folks at ECI.
And part of their reason is because they'd never had a full-time staff person running their program. It was somebody who had a full-time job and was asked to do this. And running these kind of programs is a tremendous amount of work. And that's how I started out. I'm a full-time faculty member, but I also started this program and have been directing it. Luckily, I've been able to establish staffing under me, but this is why programs end up closing. This is why programs can't start, because they don't have a full-time person. They don't have the funding for a full-time person to oversee and run. It's just not sustainable when you have someone else like on campus just doing it. It doesn't work that way.
The person at ECI had a full-time job and was doing this as a volunteer, kind of, or?
He was doing it as part of his job, but I think Chris was the director of financial aid, Meredith, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I mean, I know he was in their financial aid office. So
Yeah.
Can that be one of our recommendations?
It was really impossible. And their program was very small, but still, it's just.
Yeah. I mean, that's what happened with Goucher. Originally, it was run by faculty, and then they did a national search for a director because it was unsustainable.
Yeah, I was just raising like, can that again? I know my understanding is we're avoiding things that are very costly, but should or could that be one of our recommendations to fully fund? And I think it should. I think it should, right? Because I mean, that
Yes.
seems to be a key part of success.
We should
Yes.
definitely put it in there as a recommendation. Even if we're not asking the state to fund it, it should just be a recommendation. Yeah.
Yeah, fully. Well, I mean, we think we do need to, right? I mean, you're pretty much asking them to fund. Yeah. Okay.
Well, we're
Well,
not,
we can just make the argument of why programs fail, why they can't start up. It is because, and
right.
it's just obvious. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack, but thank you.
No, that was great.
There are no stupid questions. I want people to ask things even if they're not sure whether they're relevant. I mean, otherwise we don't get into anything. So, Christian, well taken. Don't worry.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that we're not even talking about is how do we help students continue when they leave prison? That's a whole nother conversation about support services for that population that not all campuses have. So it's just another topic. There's a lot of them. We'll keep that out of it for now.
I'll say Andrea or Andrea?
Andrea.
Well, I'm also, and I'm sure some of us others are on the task force, designed the division of returning citizens. So I definitely think we need to make sure these two are talking to that point.
Definitely.
And I've contacted the chair of that task force, and we're sharing resources and stuff like that. So we definitely can coordinate in the future with like some of that reentry work.
Okay.
All right,
I have to peel off a little before 2 because I promised somebody to meet him at 2. So I just want to let you know.
So why don't we do 10 minutes for space and 10 minutes for technology, just to kind of touch on both of those things. We have site visits coming up for some of the prisons where we'll get, I guess, a little bit more info about space, and a lot of people on this call know enough about the space inside many of these facilities. Last time we talked about Goucher's trailers as a exciting opportunity. I'm just looking at the message, to a creative way to add more space to a facility that doesn't have a lot of it. Ramika was talking about some really cool things, not really about space, but just the environment in general that I'd love to maybe talk more about. Her comment this morning made me think about outdoor space during the times of year where we can utilize outdoor space, perhaps, April to October, and maybe there's ideas there about popping up some tents and picnic tables to run class. I don't know. So I'm not sure where we want to start with this conversation. Anyone wants to, there's actually a lot of hands up.
Alicia had her hand up first.
Okay. Alicia, you want to?
Yeah. Well, so it's kind of about the previous conversation. So figures, I was thinking we should just maybe do the difference between what Pell Grant cover and what tuition is, instead of, so we can demonstrate that, because tuition rates could change over time. I wouldn't want us to get locked into a particular figure, and that would probably be the easiest in terms of calculations. If we just exclude student fees and just do what's the difference tuition wise. Is like some of the workforce development, like California does all that workforce development funds related to supporting higher education in prison and like post. Is that in the report at all anywhere about a possible funding stream?
No,
Okay.
not.
I think maybe let's put that as a note to like explore, because it's not necessarily about creating entirely new streams of funding, but being able to access existing. So that workforce development is my understanding. That's how California has funded a tremendous amount of their higher education and prison support work project rebound centers, all those kinds of things. It's through that funding stream as opposed to an entirely new.
So
source
would
of
that
them.
mean tapping into labor funds?
Yeah, I think just thinking about I know, adding but honestly, that may be the way to do it, is not like creating something new, but like, can we be imagined as, I mean, it is workforce development, right? It is all of these things. So can we get these different existing funding streams to imagine this work as part of their, or at least fundable?
Alicia,
Yeah.
is that money being used? You mentioned rebound centers. That sounds like a reentry program or a post incarceration program.
Yeah, so it funds a lot of project rebound centers, which are
But yes, we do
yeah.
spend a lot of labor money post incarceration.
Yeah.
But this higher education conversation is all pre-release. So
Right.
while they're incarcerated behind the fence. So just so you know, yes.
No, but these project rebound centers are on college campuses supporting the students that are coming from higher education in prison to campus. So I don't know how much, I don't have the nitty gritty in terms of how much of that funding is dedicated to the in prison side versus the on campus side, but it's absolutely connected. It is higher education. So it may just be an avenue worth exploring to see how they've done it, and if it would be something that could, because that I think would be a logical kind of recommendation in the funding. So I apologize for bringing us back when you were trying to move us forward, Andrea. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay.
Thank you. And John, you had your hand up after Alicia. Did you have something else when we're talking about
just 10 seconds on the space conversation. When we think about space and obviously the actual physical place where learning is going to happen from a higher education standpoint, I just want to remind everybody as we talk about trailers outside and additional actual physical spaces in and around the prison, or even outside on the grounds, but still within the fence. Movement, security and movement is one of the biggest things that are keeping our regular schools from being able to open. So what I would just urge is that we keep, some alternatives in mind that don't require space. Alternatives in mind that allow them to remotely use their, because I think they have Origin laptops currently. Tanya, you can correct me if I'm wrong, where they can actually use that in their dormitory space and not in a school or in a physical place. So just a quick thought. So more than just the cost of the space, but the cost of the security to move people from space to space and then watch the space is also a concern as well.
Thank you.
You're correct, John, in this. We're working on funding as far as that goes as well, because right now the tablets are limited to where they can use them. The education tablets are limited, and we're working with our colleges now to expand that platform.
Excuse me, there's the tablets and then there's the laptops. My understanding at JCI where I teach is they can only use the laptops in the library and classrooms.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So that's a perfect example, Judith. And what I was thinking is, instead of paying a person to create a physical space, instead of paying security officers to go out and patrol and secure a space while they're doing it, it might be better to just install Wi-Fi access so that they can use their laptops in a place other than the library.
Yeah.
This may work out to be a more cost-efficient solution. So just
they even need tablets if they had the laptops in the cell.
It's the same thing. So tablets and laptops operate on a network that only operates within certain parts of the, prison behind the fence. So if we were to expand that,
I
you
think
wouldn't have a space problem. Yep.
I don't know. I think that this is very important. This whole technology thing, it ties very closely to space, as John is bringing up, and we ought to be emulating the way colleges operate outside as much as possible within a secure internet situation. There's no reason technology is there to firewall everything and just create the world you want behind the wall, so to speak. And we ought to be pushing that and makes instruction much more flexible.
So just
We-
providing an alternative to the space conversation.
Yeah,
Thank
and we've, to go off that, John, we've had conversations over many years. We even tried it out at one point in time, having dedicated housing units for students who are enrolled in education programs. That way, it's just that housing unit that has the access to whatever, and they can keep their laptops, tablets, whatever it might be within the housing unit, because it's, you know, structured in that way that it's just education students. So we've talked to Danielle about this, and I'm not sure
I was
where
going to say, I love that idea. I don't think we've been able to execute that in our here in Maryland yet, but I really love it, and I would love to talk about how we could execute that for a variety of reasons.
The number of states we've contacted have been doing some of that, and I've seen some of that in the past in visits years ago already, you know, so it's possible.
I'd love to see that as a recommendation. We tried it at JCI in 2017. It was great. It worked for a year, and then it fell apart because they moved pretrial people into JCI and had to move everybody around. And so if there was a policy at the state level that these housing units should be a thing, then it never would have been disrupted, and it would still be taking place. But that's what happens at prisons, that things get disrupted all of the time. Let's move to, I think, Christian and then Meredith.
Thank you. And John, I appreciate that context about the space conversation, because I was trying to figure out like what are the parameters. One thing I did hear, and I'm just thinking again, brainstorming. I met with some advocates who were advocating for the Monica Cooper Act, which some may be familiar is build a pre-release center for women. Right now, there's none. And my understanding is the last one closed in 2010. But they said that the original one that closed in 2010 is being used by DOT and it's being underutilized. And they were like, well, why can't we just reopen that? Like, it already has the facilities, there's nothing wrong with the building, et cetera. So just thinking about that as a space alternative, and maybe even thinking about some state buildings that are currently being used and are underutilized. Like, we have the utilization numbers for all our buildings. So just something to think about. Also, just I used to work for Baltimore City Public Schools, so thinking about city and county, former schools, there's a ton of empty schools in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, even in Baltimore County, starting to close the schools. So those are buildings. Second point, just thinking also, I know Maryland applied and received, right, the 1115 waiver for Medicaid, which I'm understanding enables, returning citizens to access Medicaid funds, I think 180 days before they leave. So I wonder, is there any usage for education or some creative usage of those funds to support these goals?
Thank you. Meredith, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just on the overlap between technology and space, I do want to, like, from my perspective at least, like, technology can enhance the situation, but it shouldn't like replace the relational aspect of education that I think is super valuable, has been extremely valuable, I think, in the 12 years that GPEB has been operating. So it can be like in addition to, but you still need a physical space where students are meeting with professors and having sort of like the one-on-one holistic experience that students on main campuses are getting. So that's just my 2 cents there.
That's important, because there's a tendency to replace people with technology in corrections. I mean, tablets, there's companies that have come into private companies, oh, we're going to offer all this stuff on a tablet, blah, blah, blah. Well, they didn't say it's also costing people to add things, to download things to the tablets. I mean, so you have to be very careful when we say technology. We mean educational technology, not some substitute. Educational technology of a holistic nature with a face-to-face instruction. And I just hope the college programs are going to emphasize that, so that it begins to happen in our regular programs slowly but surely as well.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts about space? John Griffin, I saw your comment about officers and security and being creative. And yes, that's of course an issue.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on John's comment. Like, is there any reason we couldn't recommend that, like, outside classes, or say, hey, the regulations are too strict, we don't think, based on what we see of the data, is not a security risk, just piggybacking on what he said. So I don't know what guidance, right, or what that's based off of, but it's something to think about.
Well, when you look at that issue, it all comes down to custody's opinion or attitude towards it all. custody is under a huge amount of stress right now because their numbers are low. They're having significant staffing issues of their own. So they're always looking to shut down posts. They're always looking to minimize movement. And as a result, they've adopted a very paranoid approach to how they address II movement and class space and activity space. At ECI, I guarantee you that if anybody ever asked to have a class outside at a picnic table, they would have been escorted out the compound. Because the custody staff there would have said, absolutely not. They're going to jump the fence. They're going to run, and that's going to compromise the security of the entire institution. Now, it's all nonsense because, you know, the fences at ECI are very formidable, just like any other prison. Nobody's jumping the fence. It's not going to happen. It's unrealistic. But that's the attitude that they have. But my point, I guess, is because they're already so wound up about their own scheduling. I mean, they constantly, on a day-to-day basis, figure out how can we cover the minimum number of posts because everybody's calling out, or people are on vacation, or there just aren't enough. So it's a very polarizing issue, and unfortunately, it's one that's going to be kind of at the top of the food chain in terms of factoring into any decision or recommendation that we make. The ideas are great. You know, I know the teachers themselves, the teachers that I worked with at ECI would love to have classes outdoors at a picnic table, or, you know, think outside the box in terms of even going down into the housing units themselves, using some of the what they call day rooms or the recreation rooms there in between meal times or in between, you know, scheduled rec times, because it's space. You know, there's tables, there's chairs. You can teach in there. I taught classes in those rooms for years. So it works, but I think we're going to have to really include, you know, the custody issue as part of our thinking here.
I think that custody can also be an ally if you approach them properly. If you approach them that we're helping you do your job better, to make things more secure, how can we do that? I don't know how many times that some correctional officers told me things that I couldn't believe. They were so liberal in nature. Like one place where I was running, I worked in Montgomery County and Howard counties, but the officers thought that if people were busy with tablets and things, that took that load off of them because they'll be busy doing stuff instead of trying to scheme. And they were the ones that helped create how we check out the tablets and how to get them back and how to charge them. They built the station for us. You know, so you never know. If you approach security, I mean, and say we want to help you with that attitude, you know, then how can we do this? You know, that they can be allies.
Yeah, there certainly could be allies, but we'd have to structure our conversations with them about that, you know, very carefully. And it's going to depend on, you know, which institution it is, because some institutions are better than others. Inside the institutions themselves, some groups of officers are better than others when it comes to, you know, having conversations like this. But it's going to have to be a very choreographed conversation, I think.
Okay.
I just wanted to add.
I have to leave in a minute, so Ainsley and I'll get back together. So I'll just tune off, let you guys continue. But thank you for all this. This is terrific.
Yeah, there are some comments in the chat, but Karen had her hand up, so let's move to Karen.
Yeah, just real quick, I just wanted to add that I think specificity matters here when we're talking about space, because each institution is different. It's laid out differently. The security level of each institution is different. So I think it would be really important for us to sort of reverse engineer what the parameters are if we're working in a maximum security prison, as opposed to MCIW, which is really the only women's institution in the state. And so it's technically a maximum run more like a minimum. What are the parameters there? And then also, I mean, I was the program's clerk when Goucher first came. And so I only have that experience, but it was very much so Goucher showed up and it was a big deal. And then the institution was like, okay, this class here, this sociology class will meet here. But I think that if it were sort of reversed and Goucher understood what are the space options. And so I think last time when we were talking, some of us that are formerly incarcerated gave examples, specific examples of space. And I'm thinking of MCAW because it's the only one I'm familiar with, but there's a baby bonding room, which is used once a month at best, but usually once a quarter. And that's an entire room where security is already posted there because of the building that it's in. But nobody would ever think to ask, like, can we use this room? Can we have somebody who is assigned a detail redo baby bonding for those 3 hours every once a month on a Friday, but all of the other times it's an open space that we can sort of use for classrooms. Nobody would ever think to know that because they're not talking to the people that would actually say, like, hey, this is a space that we see every day and it's always empty. And instead, we're just relying on administration, which may or may not be for the programs, to say, here, go here, because it's easier for them. So sort of this like thinking outside of the box, talking to some of the people on the inside that are currently inside or have been, and just really understanding like, what are the parameters that we face here? And really repping for the women here, like figuring out what's specific to the women. It's a very, very different institution than the men's. It runs differently, and there's a major college program there. So that one's really going to just sort of be its own thing, just like everything else at the women's.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. Just looking at the chat. I don't know. Tanya, do you want to comment more on that?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, there was so much going on. I don't know if this has been proposed or even considered, or if it can be a possibility. I'm from the BOP. So the Federal Bureau of Prisons, of course, the education staff, they're trained as correctional officers. And I know we have different pins with DPSCS and with labor. I don't know if something can be combined. John, you may have to chime in on that, but there are correctional educators. They're trained as law enforcement officers as well. And so they're able to keep the education departments open when they don't actually have to have officers. I know the state has to have an officer in the building in order to keep those programs running. And I know we have some institutions that are just shut down. So having a college program in those facilities just would not work, but we might be able to expand more if there was a pin for a correctional educator. They're an educator, but they've also been trained as a correctional officer, and that way they can also hold classes and keep those departments open as well, and that would provide more programming. So I don't know if that's something that can be considered, and also the BOP to get around some of the space limitations. And this would require the wiring, and of course, so that's funding as well. But they have the virtual classrooms in some of the housing units in those resource rooms, or some are in actual dorm rooms. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that that's something that has been considered, can be considered, what type of money that would involve.
Yeah, and that sounds like technology and housing being like we're having this conversation about both of these things, I think, at the same time, but sounds like housing units dedicated to education would be the place where you have those kind of things taking place.
Right. There's really not any others. They're not going to allow classes, like you said, on the grounds, on the yard. You can have them in maybe the resource rooms in the housing units, but that would require maybe some wiring. If you have the virtual classes, that's an alternative to just the tablets.
Great, thank you. All right, we are at 2:00. We didn't touch on that much technology, but it was trickled into this conversation. Ainsley, is there anything else? Oh, two more things as we wrap up this conversation for this month. It's just some information about conferences that are up and coming. We talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but not everybody was here. Bowie is having a conference this weekend, tomorrow through Sunday, and there's still the ability to sign up and attend that conference if anyone is interested. I know a few of us are going to that. and some of us are going to New Orleans next week. That is closed, but we will be learning about some of the things that we're already talking about. We'll be learning hopefully more about funding, space, and technology when we attend these conferences. Ainsley just put in the chat the link to the BUI conference that is taking place, all about higher ed in prison, specifically for HBCUs. First one ever in the country that's emphasizing higher ed for HBCUs. So check that out if you're available. And Ainsley, anything else before we end?
Yeah, I just want to say that I'll definitely be taking all of these ideas and writing them up. If HB 877 doesn't get passed, we still have a couple more days to hope that it does get passed. But if it doesn't get passed, we will definitely share a draft of the interim report to everybody before our next May meeting, so we can vote on it before the June 1st requirement.
And the May meeting is May, I think everybody probably has it. What's the date?
Yeah, let's see, May 29th. But I think we'll definitely have more conversations about it before then, because the commission has to receive it and approve it.
Should we meet earlier in May? Since
I think if we want to wait maybe until next week to see if HB 877 passes.
Isn't it April 24th? I have April 24th on my calendar. Is that wrong?
Oh, no, I think you're right, because I think we did we did push this meeting. This is supposed to be the March meeting. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
Okay.
April 24th.
All right, that sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.